I am so confused. I have no idea how I'm supposed to open this. I want to be completely honest with you here. For the longest time, I had the opinion that when it comes to mixing and mastering, room correction software is not necessary if your room is already properly treated. But a couple of months ago, Sonarworks reached out to me and asked if I wanted to test out their SoundID Reference and share my thoughts with you guys. At first I was hesitant, but Sonarworks said I didn't have to make a video if I didn't like it. So I thought, why not? So in this video, I'm going to discuss my experience with SoundID Reference as a mixing and mastering engineer who has a professionally treated studio and has never used any room correction software. I'll talk about the calibration process and whether or not SoundID Reference is something that could benefit you. The calibration process turned out to have really fascinated me. In the past, I've always measured my room with Room EQ Wizard, or REW, and it's really just putting the measurement mic at the listening spot, point it to the left speaker, hit measure, point it to the right speaker, hit measure, and point it up to measure both speakers. But with SoundID Reference, it's actually a lot more involved, and the measuring app has some serious algorithm and calculations going on under the hood. First, you have to measure the left and right speakers' mid-range drivers up close, and the Measure app would be able to calculate the distance between them. I definitely didn't expect that, and I was quite impressed it would be able to do that. In my case, the calculation was 2 inches short, so it's not the most accurate, but depending on the level of precision you're aiming for, the calculation is certainly quite helpful. For me, I always try to be as accurate as possible when it comes to room measurements, so I did correct the distance in the app. After that, the app asked me to put the mic at the listening spot and measure again. This time, the app calculated the distance between the listening spot to each speaker, and the calculations were completely accurate. The next step was what really fascinated me. The app told me to position the mic at 37 different spots in a room, and as I moved the mic around, the app was able to calculate where the mic was in the room in real time. That just blew my mind. The calculation was pretty sensitive too, because it would detect the slightest movement to the mic. Once that's done, the app gave me the results of the measurement, which is pretty much what I already know. You can see that is mostly flat, especially above 1K, and below that I have a few peaks and dips, most of them less than 3 decibels. To compare, this is what my studio's frequency response looks like when I measure with REW. You can see that it's quite different, and REW shows a much flatter response. I can't explain why that is because I'm not an acoustic expert, but if I were to guess, I would assume it's because the way the two applications calculate the response is quite different. And I'm sure the fact that SoundID Reference Measure app asked me to measure 37 different spots in the room is also a factor. Perhaps there's more smoothing in the SoundID Reference app as it's more user-friendly as well. I feel like REW is really more for nerds, so it just gives you the raw data and then you can process it however you see fit. So now with the measurements, you can enable the room correction in the SoundID Reference app. You can see that it's pretty much doing boosts and dips to create a flat line. I gotta say, the Measure app is incredibly well designed. I could tell it was created with the user in mind. It takes you through the entire process step by step, and it makes everything very straightforward and easy to follow. It's been over 2 months since the day I set up SoundID Reference, and I can tell you that I have been doing mixing and mastering work with the corrections on ever since. In my case, because my studio is already professionally treated and has a pretty flat response to begin with, the difference SoundID Reference makes is actually very insubstantial. I would say it's about 5 to 10% depending on the music. However, it's like that extra icing on the cake that makes my monitoring system even more accurate, which then allows me to trust what I'm hearing even more. I actually can't hear any difference in vocals, drums, or the bass guitar with SoundID's corrections enabled. But for high-gain guitar tones, SoundID Reference makes a noticeable difference in the low-mid frequencies. Because my room is a bit on a square side, there are a couple of dips and bumps in the low mids that I couldn't fully fix via acoustic treatment. It's nothing too major, as you can see from the room measurement, but the corrections SoundID implemented are definitely helpful. When I'm listening to high-gain guitar tones now, I feel that the low mids are less muddy and more defined, and I can judge the tones better. This might seem very insubstantial to you, but because most of the music I mix and master is metal, with walls of distorted guitars, it definitely makes it a bit easier to dial tones. One thing I do want to mention is that the listening spot setting in the SoundID Reference app makes a huge difference in terms of stereo image. I found that I prefer to have it disabled because when it's on, it actually shifts everything slightly to one side. However, this is not an issue in the software. It's just that the hearing of each of my ear is slightly different, where I hear things slightly louder on my left ear than my right ear. So I actually had to turn up my right speaker just slightly. And you can see that SoundID Reference did pick that up, as it shows that the right speaker is 0.4 decibel louder. It's another indication that the measurement was very accurate. I suspect I'm not the only one with slightly asymmetrical hearing, so you can try disabling the listening spot setting if you find the calibration to sound weird. There are a couple of things that I feel would have made SoundID Reference even better. The first one is that I wish there was a measurement workflow that is designed to be used with a mic stand for more accurate measurement results. Right now, the measuring process is really best done when you hold the mic in your hand, as you need to move it around so much. However, I feel like you would lose quite a bit of precision when you do measurements like this because, you really can't hold it perfectly still, for one, but also it's hard to tell whether or not you're holding it, at the same height as where your ears would be. You could also be slightly angling the mic without knowing it. So my guess is that Sonarworks tries to make the measuring process easy for most users, but I think professionals would really appreciate an advanced measuring mode of some sort for extra accuracy. Similarly, I was surprised that it didn't ask me to measure the audio interface. With REW, you can create a calibration file for your specific audio interface just by creating a recording loop. Different converters and mic preamps would color the recorded signal differently. So I'm not sure why SoundID Reference doesn't take this into account. I do appreciate that they ask you to enter the ID of your specific measurement mic, presumably to account for any variation in the manufacturing process. So it's not like Sonarworks doesn't care about the details. The other thing I wish SoundID Reference had was the ability to apply a high-pass filter and a low-pass filter to the correction, because I don't really need correction above 1 kHz since it's already so flat. I also don't need correction below around 50 Hz because I actually prefer to use sub-pack to monitor the sub-bass frequencies. For metal, it's really just kick and bass down there, so I find that feeling those low frequencies instead of hearing them is a much better way of monitoring. So now begs the question, is SoundID Reference worth getting? Before I answer this, I want to make one thing really clear. SoundID Reference is not a replacement for actual acoustic treatment. Even my rep from Sonarworks says that. You simply cannot skip proper acoustic treatment if your goal is to do audio work that requires critical listening in your studio. Now that's out of the way. I do think that SoundID Reference is worth getting, especially for those of you who already treated your room properly and are looking to iron out any remaining kinks that you can't fix for whatever reason. Using it definitely changed my view on room correction software. Like I mentioned at the beginning, I had the opinion that there's no point to getting room correction software if you already properly treated your room. My thinking was that while software correction may give you some improvements, you don't really need a room with a completely flat frequency response to do mixing and mastering work. Even big recording studios would suffer from early reflections from their big mixing consoles and wall of gear, and yet engineers had no problem making awesome sounding records. However, what I was wrong about was that there's no harm in making things easier for me to do my job. I have been able to create professional level mixes and masters without any software room correction. But having SoundID Reference's calibration definitely helped me get to the result I want faster. That's it for the video. Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. And in the description, there's a link to SoundID Reference's website if you want to take a look. Give this video a like if you find it helpful, and subscribe if you want more music production content. And I'll see you next time. This is why I don't do unboxing videos, because I'm so lost as to how I'm supposed to open the box. I don't think I'm supposed to open from there.